For centuries, we've been told a story, a powerful narrative that shapes our understanding of morality, justice, and divinity. But what if that story isn't as straightforward as it seems? What if the character we've been taught to fear the most, the one we call Satan, isn't the villain of the story after all? And what if the God you've worshipped isn't as honest as you've been led to believe? In this narrative we've inherited, Satan is painted as the ultimate deceiver, the embodiment of evil, the one who led humanity astray. Yet, when you dig into the Bible, there are moments where the lines blur. Let's talk about the Garden of Eden, the genesis of humanity's so-called fall. The story goes that God warned Adam and Eve not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or they would surely die. Enter the serpent, often equated with Satan, who told Eve something different: you will not surely die. Your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. She ate the fruit. Adam ate the fruit. Their eyes were opened. And guess what? They didn't drop dead. Stop right there. This is where things get interesting. Who lied? Who told the truth? God said they'd die. The serpent said they wouldn't. And the serpent was right. Adam and Eve didn't die on the spot. Instead, they gained knowledge, awareness. They saw the world differently. And for this, humanity was cursed. Ask yourself, does that sound like the punishment of a benevolent being? Or the wrath of someone who feared humanity becoming too much like them? Let's go deeper. In the book of Job, Satan doesn't sneak around whispering lies. He walks right up to God and starts negotiating. He's given permission, yes, permission, to test Job's faith through unimaginable suffering. This isn't the devil of horror movies, plotting chaos for chaos' sake. This is an agent of God, fulfilling a divine purpose. If Satan is inherently evil, why does God collaborate with him? It's not a rhetorical question, it's a challenge to think critically about what you've been taught. Now, consider the banned books of the Bible, like the Book of Enoch. These texts offer a vastly different perspective on the spiritual realm. They portray a world where divine beings rebel against a tyrannical order, not out of malice, but in pursuit of freedom or justice. Why were these books excluded from the canon? Could it be that they told a story that didn't fit the narrative of control and obedience that organized religion thrives on? It's easy to dismiss these ideas as heretical or blasphemous. But history is written by the victors. The institutions that decided what texts were holy and what stories would be buried had their own agendas, power, control, and dominance. The question isn't whether Satan is evil. The question is whether you're willing to question everything you've been told about him, about God, and about the nature of truth. If you think you know who Satan is, think again. Forget the horns, the tail, and the pitchfork. The Satan of ancient scripture is a far cry from the caricature painted by centuries of religious doctrine and Hollywood tropes. The Hebrew Bible, the foundation of Judeo-Christian theology, describes Satan not as a rogue agent but as part of the divine court, a tester, an accuser, a necessary counterbalance in the cosmic order. Take the original Hebrew word for Satan, ha-Satan. It doesn't mean prince of darkness or evil incarnate. It translates to the accuser or the adversary. Think of a prosecutor in a courtroom, someone whose role is to challenge, to question, to push boundaries. This is how Satan is portrayed in the book of Job, not as a rebel out to destroy humanity, but as a divine agent doing his job. God permits Satan to test Job, even suggesting him as a subject. This wasn't a covert operation or a betrayal. It was sanctioned, deliberate, and collaborative. The Bible's depiction of Satan changes over time. In earlier texts, Satan isn't an independent force of evil. He's part of the heavenly council, a member of God's team. Fast forward to later books, and Satan starts to morph into a more sinister figure. Why the shift? This evolution coincides with the influence of Zoroastrianism during the Jewish exile in Babylon. Zoroastrianism introduced the concept of a cosmic struggle between good and evil, and this dualistic thinking began to seep into Jewish theology. The New Testament takes this transformation even further. By the time you get to books like Revelation, Satan has become a full-blown antagonist, waging war against God. But here's the kicker: this wasn't how he was originally portrayed. This wasn't how the ancient Hebrews understood him. This was a reinterpretation, a reframing, influenced by external cultures and evolving religious narratives. Let's talk about the Garden of Eden again, but with a sharper focus. When the serpent, often equated with Satan, entices Eve to eat the forbidden fruit, he's not lying. He's offering knowledge, the kind that opens eyes and shatters ignorance. God, on the other hand, punishes humanity for seeking this enlightenment. Pause and think about that dynamic. One offers truth, the other enforces punishment for pursuing it. It's not the dynamic of a simple hero and villain. It's complex, layered, and riddled with contradictions. The serpent's role here aligns with the Ha-Satan of Job, a challenger, a disruptor of the status quo. But why would such a role be necessary in a divine framework? Because without challenge, there's no growth. Without questions, there are no answers. This is the essence of Satan's role in these early texts. He isn't evil, he's essential. And what about the early Christians who began to craft a narrative of eternal damnation and salvation? By casting Satan as the ultimate enemy, they created a clear antagonist, an other to rally against. It's the perfect tool for control. Fear Satan, follow God, obey the church. This binary thinking has dominated for centuries, but it wasn't always this way. The Bible's own texts reveal a far more nuanced story. Satan, in his earliest forms, wasn't about chaos or destruction. He was about questioning authority, exposing hypocrisy, and forcing accountability. These aren't traits of a villain, they are traits of a revolutionary. If that unsettles you, good. It should. This isn't about comfort. It's about truth. Keep watching, because the revelations are only getting deeper. Now, this is where things start to crack open. For generations, the narrative has been simple: God is truth, and Satan is lies. But when you look at the Bible closely, the waters aren't so clear. In fact, there are moments when God's actions and words raise questions, big questions, about the nature of divine honesty and fairness. Take a closer look at the story of the Exodus. God sends Moses to free the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. Noble cause, right? But then God hardens Pharaoh's heart. Repeatedly. Every time Pharaoh seems ready to let the people go, God steps in and changes the game. Why? To create an excuse for unleashing a series of devastating plagues. This isn't some random punishment, it's calculated. God uses Pharaoh as a pawn, turning Egypt into a proving ground for divine power. It doesn't stop there. The Bible explicitly states in Ezekiel 14 verse 9, "If a prophet is deceived into uttering a prophecy, it is I, the Lord, who have deceived that prophet." That's not a misinterpretation or an ambiguous translation. It's right there. The deception, according to the text, comes directly from God. If lying is the hallmark of evil, how do we reconcile this? These aren't the actions of a being who operates above deceit. These are the tactics of someone manipulating outcomes to serve their purpose. In 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 11, the New Testament doubles down on this theme. It says, God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie. This isn't Satan at work. This is God. It's not about temptation or testing, it's about orchestrating falsehoods to lead people astray. This goes against the very narrative of a God who is purely just and purely truthful. Then there's the story of Abraham and Isaac. God commands Abraham to sacrifice his own son, Isaac, as a test of faith. At the last moment, God intervenes, providing a ram to sacrifice instead. But think about what this command represents. It's a psychological manipulation of the highest order. The trauma inflicted on both Abraham and Isaac isn't undone by the last-minute reprieve. This isn't about honesty or fairness. This is about obedience and control. God's command wasn't truthful, it was a ruse to see how far Abraham would go. These stories aren't buried in obscure chapters. They're right there in the texts taught in Sunday schools and sermons. Yet these contradictions are rarely addressed. Why? Because they don't fit the image of a perfect, benevolent deity. They reveal a side of God that's complex, calculated, and, at times, unsettling. Compare that to the serpent in Genesis. The serpent doesn't manipulate, it offers information. It doesn't force Eve to act, it gives her a choice. That's not coercion. That's agency. Yet, the serpent is the one demonized, while God's calculated deceptions are glossed over or justified. This isn't about painting God as the villain or elevating Satan to sainthood. It's about acknowledging that the narrative isn't black and white. These aren't just ancient stories, they're frameworks for understanding power, authority, and morality. They demand scrutiny because they've shaped the way humanity views truth, justice, and the divine for thousands of years. Billy Carson, a name that sends shockwaves through traditional thinking, dives into ancient texts and cosmic theories like no one else. His perspective isn't just provocative, it's a direct challenge to everything mainstream religion teaches about the dichotomy of good and evil. When he talks about the roles of God and Satan in the Bible, he flips the narrative in ways that are both shocking and grounded in research. Carson begins by tackling the very foundation of religious belief, the assumption that God is infallibly good and Satan is the embodiment of evil. He argues that this dichotomy was constructed not by divine decree but by humans seeking control. The Bible, as he points out, is a collection of texts written, edited, and curated by men, each with their own political and social agendas. The narrative of God as ultimate good and Satan as ultimate evil serves a purpose. It creates fear, establishes authority, and ensures obedience. One of Carson's most compelling points is the similarity between God's characteristics in the Old Testament and what many would consider authoritarian traits. The God described in these texts demands absolute obedience, punishes dissent with extreme measures, and even admits to causing deception when it suits divine purposes. Carson doesn't just make these claims, he backs them up with scripture. He highlights verses where God deliberately causes confusion or sends the lying spirits to achieve a desired outcome, as seen in 1 Kings 22 verse 23. Carson doesn't stop there. He draws attention to the serpent in the Garden of Eden, often equated with Satan. He reframes the serpent not as a deceiver, but as a liberator, offering knowledge and opening the eyes of Adam and Eve. According to Carson, this act wasn't one of rebellion against divine will, but a challenge to blind obedience. The serpent didn't coerce Eve. It presented information, allowing her to make a choice. This act of presenting knowledge, Carson argues, is more aligned with enlightenment than evil. He goes further, exploring the possibility that what we call God in the Bible might not always refer to the same being. Carson references ancient texts like the Enuma Elish, the Sumerian creation epic, which predates the Bible by centuries. In these texts, the gods are not monolithic, they are beings with individual motives, rivalries, and agendas. Carson suggests that the God of the Old Testament may represent one of these beings, one whose actions align more with domination than benevolence. Carson ties this to the Book of Enoch, a text excluded from the biblical canon but widely regarded in ancient Jewish and early Christian traditions. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers, angels who descend to earth, are depicted as rebellious but also as bringers of knowledge and technology to humanity. They teach human skills like metallurgy, astronomy, and medicine, which, according to the text, anger God. But why would the dissemination of knowledge provoke divine wrath? Carson suggests it's because knowledge empowers humanity, making them less dependent on divine authority. Carson also dives into the New Testament's portrayal of Satan, particularly during the temptation of Christ. In this scene, Satan offers Jesus all the kingdoms of the world if he will bow down and worship him. Carson questions why Satan would have the authority to make such an offer in the first place. If Satan is indeed the prince of this world, as described in John 14 verse 30, then his role becomes even murkier. Is he a usurper, or was he granted this authority by God? And if the latter is true, what does that say about their relationship? For Carson, these questions aren't blasphemous, they're essential. He believes that by digging into these texts and asking uncomfortable questions, we uncover truths that organized religion has worked hard to suppress. He points to the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, where the early church decided which books would become part of the biblical canon. Carson argues that this wasn't a purely spiritual decision but a political one, designed to consolidate power and create a unified doctrine. Carson's analysis doesn't just rely on ancient texts. He brings in modern science and theories about the origins of humanity. He explores the possibility that the God of the Bible could represent an advanced extraterrestrial intelligence, one that manipulated early humans for its own purposes. This isn't a fringe idea, it's a theory supported by interpretations of ancient artifacts, structures, and writings that seem to depict beings descending from the heavens. It's no secret that the Bible we know today is incomplete. Entire books were excluded from the canon, deliberately omitted by early religious leaders. These texts, known as apocryphal or banned books, paint a very different picture of the spiritual world, human origins, and the roles of God and Satan. They hold clues that challenge the narrative most of us have been taught to accept without question. Start with the Book of Enoch, a text revered by ancient Jewish sects and even quoted in the New Testament, Jude 1 verses 14 to 15. Despite its influence, it was excluded from the Bible by the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. Why? Because it tells a story that doesn't align with the carefully curated image of God as the sole benevolent force in the universe. The Book of Enoch introduces the Watchers, a group of angels sent to observe humanity. Instead of merely observing, they intervene, teaching human skills like metalworking, weapon-making, and astronomy. They also interbreed with human women, creating the Nephilim, giants who supposedly roamed the earth before the flood. These Watchers weren't cast as inherently evil in the original texts. They were punished, yes, but their actions are depicted as complex, not malicious. They shared knowledge that elevated humanity, knowledge that made humans less reliant on divine authority. And that's the key, their rebellion wasn't about chaos but empowerment. The anger of God in this narrative stems from humans acquiring forbidden knowledge. Sound familiar? It's a theme that echoes the story of the serpent in Eden. Now consider the Gospel of Judas. Discovered in the 1970s and dating back to the 2nd century, this text flips the traditional understanding of Judas Iscariot, the man who betrayed Jesus. In this gospel, Judas isn't a villain. He's a confidant, acting on Jesus' instructions to set in motion the events leading to the crucifixion. The betrayal isn't treachery, it's obedience. The Gospel of Judas challenges the idea of good and evil as binary opposites and reframes Judas' role as part of a divine plan. Then there's the Gospel of Thomas, another text excluded from the Bible. Unlike the canonical Gospels, which focus on miracles and narratives, the Gospel of Thomas is a collection of sayings attributed to Jesus. These sayings emphasize inner enlightenment and self-discovery over blind obedience to a higher power. In one striking passage, Jesus reportedly says, "The kingdom of God is within you." It's a direct call to look inward, to seek truth and divinity not in external rituals, but in one's own being. This stands in stark contrast to the institutionalized religion that emphasizes intermediaries like priests and churches. Why were these texts banned? The answer is control. The early church had to create a unified doctrine, a singular, authoritative narrative. Texts like the Book of Enoch, the Gospel of Judas, and the Gospel of Thomas presented ideas that threatened that unity. They introduced complexity, nuance, and perspectives that didn't fit the narrative of a singular, omnipotent God and a singular, malevolent Satan. The exclusion of these texts wasn't about preserving truth, it was about shaping a version of truth that supported the church's authority. But it's not just the content of these banned books that's revolutionary, it's what their existence reveals. These texts show that early religious thought was far from monolithic. It was diverse, debated, and dynamic. There wasn't one story of God and Satan, there were many. And the narrative that survived wasn't necessarily the most accurate, it was the most convenient for those in power. Consider what these banned books tell us about Satan. The Book of Enoch portrays the Watchers as rebels, but their rebellion wasn't senseless. It was driven by a desire to share knowledge, to bridge the gap between divine beings and humanity. The Gospel of Judas presents a version of events where betrayal serves a higher purpose, blurring the lines between loyalty and treachery. And the Gospel of Thomas eliminates the need for external saviors, placing the responsibility for salvation squarely on the individual. Religious doctrine isn't just a set of spiritual principles. It's a powerful tool, a system designed to influence how people think, act, and perceive the world. When you examine the Bible and the way its stories have been presented over centuries, it becomes clear that the traditional narrative of God and Satan is more about control than divine truth. Look at the way doctrine frames obedience. From the Old Testament to the New Testament, the concept of unquestioning loyalty to God is repeatedly emphasized. Abraham is praised for his willingness to sacrifice his son. The Israelites are commanded to follow God's laws to the letter, with severe consequences for disobedience. In the New Testament, Jesus' followers are told to love God with all their heart and soul, placing faith above reason or personal autonomy. These themes are not accidental, they serve a purpose. A belief system built on absolute obedience ensures that people don't question the authority behind it. This is where the figure of Satan becomes crucial. By casting Satan as the ultimate adversary, doctrine creates a powerful mechanism for compliance. Any deviation, any questioning of God's authority, can be dismissed as the influence of Satan. It's a brilliant psychological strategy. Doubt isn't just discouraged, it's demonized. And in a system like this, control becomes effortless. People police themselves, suppressing their own curiosity and critical thinking out of fear of eternal damnation. But the contradictions in this narrative are glaring. For instance, if God is omnipotent and omniscient, why allow Satan to exist at all? If Satan is truly the source of all evil, why does God, as the Bible shows repeatedly, permit Satan to act? The story of Job is a prime example. Satan isn't operating independently. He's presenting a case to God, who not only listens but gives explicit permission for Job's life to be upended. What does this say about the relationship between God and Satan? It's not one of pure antagonism. It's a dynamic of negotiation, even collaboration. That's not the kind of narrative you hear in Sunday sermons. This isn't limited to the Bible. Throughout history, religious institutions have used the fear of Satan and the promise of divine reward to maintain their influence. The medieval church, for example, exploited this dichotomy to consolidate power during the Inquisition. Accusations of witchcraft and heresy were justified by invoking satanic influence. Entire communities lived in fear, not just of an invisible adversary, but of their own neighbors. The result? Unquestioning loyalty to the church and its leaders. The same pattern exists in modern times. Fundamentalist groups across different religions use the concept of a malevolent force to justify extreme control over their followers. Whether it's restricting women's rights, persecuting LGBTQ+ individuals, or silencing dissent, the rationale often comes down to the defending against evil. The figure of Satan isn't just a character in a story, it's a weaponized idea, used to enforce conformity and obedience. But here's the twist: the more you dig into the texts, the more you realize that the actions attributed to God often mirror those ascribed to Satan. God deceives prophets, 1 Kings 22 verse 23, hardens Pharaoh's heart, Exodus 9 verse 12, and commands the slaughter of entire populations, Joshua 6 verse 21. These aren't the actions of a purely benevolent being. Meanwhile, Satan's role, particularly in the Old Testament, is less about destruction and more about challenging the status quo. He tests, questions, and exposes flaws in human faith. If anything, his actions lead to growth and introspection. This inversion of roles isn't accidental. It's a deliberate framing, designed to make God's authority unassailable. By painting any challenge as evil, the system ensures its survival. And yet, the cracks are there for anyone willing to look. The banned books of the Bible, the contradictions within the canon, and the historical use of fear-based narratives all point to a more complex reality. Religion, at its core, is about stories that explain the world, give meaning to life, and provide a sense of order. But stories are also tools. They can be shaped, manipulated, and wielded for purposes far beyond their original intent. The story of God and Satan is no exception. It's a narrative that's been refined over centuries, stripping away nuance and dissenting voices to create a binary view of good and evil. But the truth is rarely binary. It's messy, layered, and often uncomfortable. We've come a long way in this exploration, peeling back layers of history, doctrine, and scripture to uncover a story that's been hidden in plain sight. By now, one thing should be clear: the narrative of God versus Satan is not as simple as it's been sold to us. It's not a clean-cut battle of good versus evil, but a dynamic woven with power, control, and the human need to explain the inexplicable. If the traditional story has cracks, what does that mean for how we move forward? It means looking at the texts, not with fear, but with curiosity. It means recognizing that stories can serve more than one purpose. They can inspire faith and provide comfort, but they can also be tools for shaping societies, reinforcing hierarchies, and maintaining power structures. One of the most revealing pieces of this puzzle is how consistently knowledge and autonomy are framed as threats in these stories. Whether it's Adam and Eve gaining awareness, the Watchers sharing wisdom with humanity, or figures like Judas playing a role in a larger plan, the act of stepping outside the boundaries set by divine authority is almost always punished. But isn't knowledge what elevates humanity? Isn't questioning what drives progress? These stories don't just reflect spiritual concerns, they reveal a tension between control and freedom, between obedience and self-discovery. Throughout history, this tension has played out in more than just religious texts. The institutions that carry these stories have used them to shape the world. Empires were built, wars were fought, and entire populations were controlled through the narrative of divine authority versus rebellion. The figure of Satan, especially, became a scapegoat, a convenient symbol for anything that challenged the established order. But what if that challenge isn't something to fear? What if it's a necessary part of growth? The more you look at it, the more you see that these stories aren't about a cosmic war. They're about us, about humanity's relationship with power, truth, and our own potential. They ask a question that has no easy answer. How do we balance the need for order with the inevitability of change? The serpent in Eden, the Watchers of Enoch, and even Satan in Job's story, they are not just characters in an ancient drama. They're archetypes, representing the forces that push humanity to question, to learn, and to evolve. This isn't about rejecting faith or tearing down belief systems. It's about understanding them. It's about realizing that these stories, as powerful as they are, don't have to trap us in fear or blind obedience. They can be tools for empowerment, invitations to ask deeper questions and explore the complexities of existence. By challenging the traditional narrative, we're not dishonouring the faith of those who came before us. We're doing what humanity has always done, seeking truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And here's the most powerful realization: the very act of questioning, of seeking, is what makes us human. It's what these stories, ironically, are all about. So where do we go from here? We go forward with eyes open. We recognize that the battle between God and Satan, between obedience and rebellion, isn't a battle at all, it's a dialogue. A conversation about what it means to be human, about the choices we make, and about the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of it all. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this has sparked something in you, a question, a realization, or even just a curiosity to dig deeper, that's the goal. Keep asking, keep seeking, and keep challenging the narratives that no longer serve you. And as always, thank you for watching. Your time and your engagement mean everything. If you found value here, share this with someone who might need it. Let's keep the conversation going, and let's keep questioning together. See you in the next one.